And so we are the ones we've been waiting for, and so it is. Thank you. So now I have the gracious, I don't know, it's a gift to me to be able to introduce Kathleen Marden. So Kathleen, show up when you're ready, but she is a leading authority on UFO contact. She's the author of several books. Okay, she is a commentator, an international lecturer, and she is really renowned for diving into this field of abduction, with her aunt and uncle having been the first known abductees. Very famous story. They had a close encounter and an abduction in the New Hampshire mountains. Her books you will find are Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill story, Science Was Wrong, and I love this, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. So I'm going to let Kathleen tell you about her amazing experiences. And I've met you before. I'm so happy to be introducing you.
Thank you.
You are amazing, your story. I heard you on Clubhouse the other day. Also, I want everyone to know they can hear you and some of these famous speakers on Clubhouse. So welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint presentation now. So I'll share my screen.
Good.
And okay. So my presentation today is titled Communication with Non-Human Intelligence. Why should we listen? So I have, for the past several years, had an interest in studying what the ETs are attempting to convey to us as information, and it seems to become more and more pressing as time goes on. So there are two modes of conversation or communication with non-human intelligence that I could think of. And first is the physical, face-to-face kind of contact, which is generally telepathic, mind to mind. You're physically present with one another, and it might be through images, visions, or mind-to-mind telepathic communication. So there are a variety of different ways that they communicate and interact with us. Also, the non-physical, which takes place in meditation, in out-of-body experiences. It might be telepathic, but not in an alien environment. It might be through channeling or automatic writing, or you might just receive downloads. And during this time, I receive downloads sometimes, and I can feel a presence, a tingling sensation throughout my body. And it always starts in my crown chakra and then moves through my body. And I am able to get into a very relaxed state and to listen to the information that's being passed. The problems with these messages that I found out when I first started to study this is, are the messages consistent? Channeling has a very bad reputation and in the UFO field, and is not considered to be scientific. Well, I do now believe that it's scientific, and I'm going to share with you a story of one of my investigations, so you'll see what it is. You want to know, are they telling the truth? Has any information been verified? How do you know that those who claim to be ETs are not just playful spirits? And is this being imagined by the channeler? So I'm going to talk first about non-physical contact. You can also read an article that I wrote about this first case I'm going to talk about on my website at Kathleen-Marden.com. It's under my essays on contact. And I also have a chapter in Freeze Beyond UFOs, the science of contact with non-human intelligence. So I was on the board of directors of FREE, the Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, for many years. So, and took part in their study as someone who worked on it. So the first presentation that I want to do today is the story of Francis Swan. This is a historical case that started in 1954. And the way that I learned about this is that my aunt, Betty Hill, mentioned to me during my investigation of her case that she had known Helen and Rear Admiral Herbert Knowles. And she presented a letter to me. Eventually, she gave me all of her files and hypnosis tapes. And I did a very extensive investigation of her case as well. But in that letter from Helen Knowles to Betty, she wrote, Herbie not only helped her out, and she's talking about Francis Swan, but personally endorsed her letter after he read it. Then, because its contents were of vital national importance, he addressed a personal letter to Washington, which brought a group of departmental top brass to our home. Much correspondence ensued, and when they learned that the information described in her letter was not orthodox or obtained by conventional means, they withdrew their interest and went home. And she said, and I was getting tired of making sandwiches for that crowd during that time. But I thought, wow, look at that. The government was involved in this. They're interested in what these non-human entities have to tell us. And so I wanted to learn as much as I could about this so I could write about it in Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, which actually I have just updated, is the 60th anniversary edition with all of the scientific tests and test results that have been done since the first book was published in 2007. So let me tell you a little bit about what I learned about Francis Swan. But first, I could not find any family members where I could get information when I wrote Captured. So I ended up using some information that Jacques Vallée had written in his book, Forbidden Science, where he was referring to Francis Swan. I knew a little bit about her, but this is some information that I learned. Flashes of light occurred in her home and the physical materialization of a being. And this began to happen in the spring of 1954. She had been followed home by a strange craft that had sort of paced her car the previous October when she was decorating for a Halloween party at the town hall. She was actively involved in the town. She was on the school board and did many things in the town. In May 1954, messages started to stream to her day and night from Afa and Panar. And she heard this kind of buzzing sound in her ear before the messages came. And she would just get up out of bed even and write without any effort on her part and write continuously for 4 or 5 hours at a time without getting tired. So she collected a lot of these messages. She finally worked out a system with Afa and Panar that she needed to sleep and that she would be willing to collect messages from them twice a day, but that was all. And they complied with her wishes. So she ended up with a packet of information, and it was scientific information, and she thought that it was of concern of national security to our government. So she took that packet to the house of Herbert Knowles, and he started to read it. And he realized that, part of it said that atomic bomb explosions were destructive to the Earth's magnetic field. This was information, and it was pertinent in scientific data that was far beyond Francis Swan's knowledge or understanding. So he sat down and he wrote a letter to Dwight Eisenhower. And the letter was referred to the Secret Service on June 10th, 1954. The non-human intelligence entities claim to be repairing magnetic fault lines for the benefit of humankind and for the preservation of the universe, because they said, if Earth's fault lines become broken, they will have a destructive effect on the entire universe. Well, any physical physicist, material physicist would say, oh, that's impossible. This won't affect the rest of the universe. But if you think of the universe as a multi-dimensional universe, then it could have an effect out there as well. And I'll explain that in a minute. So I was able to get more information after I wrote Captured by doing radio shows and requesting that if anyone in the family heard me or knew someone who knew the family members, would they please contact me, because I was looking for the correspondence files regarding Francis SWAN, and also correspondence between Rear Admiral Herbert Knowles on the left and Wilbert Smith on the right. So Admiral Knowles was a naval officer in both world wars and a pioneer submarine commander. He received 5 Legion of Merit awards, and later he taught submarine electricity in the Navy Submarine School at New London, Connecticut. He, after his retirement, joined the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and he was on their board of directors. Then Wilbert Smith was the director of the Canadian Project Magnet UFO study. He was the director of Project Second Story, and he was a senior radio engineer for the Transport Canada's Broadcast and Measurements section. So the letter to Dwight Eisenhower stated that Francis SWAN exhibited the ability to answer scientific questions well beyond her education, and the answers were given to her by an alien named Alpha, and that the US Navy and the Canadian government are investigating. Also, the FBI, the US Air Force, and the CIA joined in on the investigation. So here is an office memorandum as evidence, and it was written to the director of the FBI concerning Francis SWAN. You see right here, information concerning her, miscellaneous. And so they talked about Francis. So the statements, what I want to really get to is what information was passed to Wilbert Smith, to Admiral Knowles, and to the US government. Well, Wilbert Smith wrote these statements to Admiral Knowles. I'm satisfied that Francis SWAN's contact was authentic. They studied her scientifically. Her communications are self-consistent. They checked well with similar material obtained through other contexts that, for the same reasons, I think are authentic. And there has been little or no opportunity for collusion. And the predictions given by her contacts have enjoyed more hits than misses. And Francis SWAN was doing this secretly with the Canadian government and the US government, and she was not communicating with other contactees. So what they were able to find is that the ET's major concerns are: you must stop polluting the earth. Humans must become more spiritual and raise their vibrational level. We will provide competent teachers to educate all of you. So they were offering to educate Earthlings and the government heads of state. There is a displaced magnetic field problem on Earth caused by nuclear explosions, and we are working to repair this. That was one piece of information that Wilbert Smith was able to check out scientifically. And he did find that these magnetic field problems were being repaired. So he felt that this was evidence that this was real, and that all vibration is sound. Sound waves permeate the universe and affect the human body. Become peaceful, and your sound will create peace. Herbert Knowles wrote this to Wilbert Smith on December 3rd, 1956. So this was an ongoing investigation. He wrote, "We must bear in mind at all times that the human desire to be the big I am, the desire for fame, prestige, power, the urge to be the first, the biggest, the best, etc. I look with a jaundiced eye upon all these organizations which have a president, a flock of officers, a high-sounding name, and an axe to grind of some kind. Beware of those who would have one join their ranks, always at a certain cost or sacrifice, perhaps the performance of some duty to prove one's worth, sincerity, willingness to obey, etc. The hard job right now is to maintain one's sense of balance, one's sanity, and responsibility to those around us." So you can see the letter here on the left, and this is the paragraph that I just quoted from. Knowles wrote another letter, wrote a letter to Smith, and he wrote, "Out of all of this, I believe the following basic facts have been established. Flying saucers are real and come from outer space. The real important thing to know about them is why they are here. Their source and mechanics are merely incidental. Their people have contacted people all over the earth in various ways, trying to get to us a common message about coming events." And I think that maybe we're in those coming events now. "And no one nation, people, or area is being shown preference by them, and none will be. They are sharing equally with people all over the earth. Any technical knowledge gained from them will be so incomplete that no nation can take advantage of it to the detriment of other nations. Absolute neutrality is a requisite in all their contacts with us. Beware of all reports that show preference or partiality on their part. The days we are living in come the closest to being the latter days described in the biblical prophecies that mankind has experienced in the last 3,000 to 4,000 years. And for anyone who might be worried about this, they had this knowledge in 1954, and they did state that this does not mean that the earth is going to be destroyed, that there will be a major shakeup and many people will die, but that the earth will continue on with people as well. So if you want to learn more about this, I'm just giving you some of the information. Go to my website at kathleen-marden.com and read the entire essay that I wrote on this. Kevin Briggs is with us today listening, and I took part in a research project, a study with Kevin and a team of researchers for a period of 2 years. I met Kevin for the first time in 2015 or 16. He actually lives in the town that I live in Florida. And he is a man who grew up in England. And at the age of 8, he was taking a bath at night. And these very tall, human-looking entities simply materialized in front of him in the bathroom and scared him to death. And then they came back and they communicated with him. And there was one named Ort, who he would sometimes be visible as an orb, but Ort sometimes would show himself as well. And so he taught Kevin how to have an out-of-body experience where he could travel around at night. And he is in communication today with these non-humans. He and his wife moved to the United States. I think it must have been about 20 years ago now. And he was a police officer in England, and he's been a real estate agent here in the United States. So I was very happy to be able to study this and to ask questions. We were allowed to ask 2 questions at one meeting that we had once a month. So there were a group of us who were asking these questions. I'm going to share just 3 of them, I think it is, with you today that I asked and I thought I received very interesting answers. And Kevin has given me permission to share more information in a book that I'm working on now. But Kevin, here's Kevin. And this is his book, Spiritual Consciousness, A Personal Journey. He has just published a 2nd book as well. And one of the questions that I asked is, why are you here? You know, what are you doing here on Earth? And the answer I received from Ort was, we are here to guide and assist in the development of your species and your world. We planted your seed here and we helped to develop it. We introduce things to assist in your development. As for the other members of the Council of 8, they are your extended families. We have a connection to our consciousness, to our souls, to our soul energy, which we all share. If we raise our level of consciousness to a higher level, you are able to achieve more. This is what we are trying to do here, they said. And being humans who were studying this, the first thing that we wanted is, well, prove to us that you are who you say you are. And so they introduced themselves to us one at a time. And there was Ort and Dee that I mentioned earlier, Orla, who was a tall white, Arna, who was was a blue avian, Chica, who is a mantis being, Targ, who is a short gray, and Zark, who was a taller gray. And then there is also Ra, who sort of runs the council, and he's an Anunnaki. He has not been in the physical for a very long period of time. He's in the 9th dimension, but the others are in the 5th and 6th dimensions. So we learned all about dimensional frequencies and also about consciousness and how to raise our consciousness. Zark met with me. He was the one who came with me. I agreed to meet with him. I couldn't see him, but boy, could I feel his presence. A very strong tingling through my body. I asked questions and I wrote his responses down. And it's a good thing that I did write those down, because I forgot everything that he said. I think that maybe it was the rate of vibrational frequency that I was vibrating at, that when I came back down to being more solid in our 3-dimensional world, that I didn't remember what he had stated. But as this was happening, again, I met with him and I could feel his presence. And I looked out on the lake because he was going to show me a craft. I couldn't see the craft, but I could see a whirling in the water. I had never seen that before on the lake out in front of my house. And it was like little waves just whirling around in about a 35-foot circle. I know that ducks can make little circles as they paddle around, but it wasn't like duck paddling. This was different. So I asked, why don't you contact our heads of state from around the world? And the answer was, your governments are aware of our presence. They have been aware for many years. They do not want to disclose our presence to the people of your planet. It is important for the development of yourselves and your planet to be aware that we are here. We are many. We have been here before, many thousands of years ago, and you destroyed yourself then. And you are in a position now to do it again, and we will not allow it. I asked, can you help us to understand life in the different dimensions? And the answer was, there are interdimensional beings who just live in the spiritual. These do transcend the dimensions from time to time. Then we have what you call extraterrestrials from different dimensions. The difference between the dimensions is only the difference in the vibrational frequencies that they exist in. So people get taken between the spiritual, get mistaken between the spiritual and the physical from the different dimensions. That was important information to me. I asked, what process is used to remove humans or to move humans through solid surfaces, such as walls and ceilings, onto craft and back? And the answer I received is, what you consider solid can be changed and altered. They are just atoms with electrons, which are of a certain vibration. We amplify the vibrations to different vibrational frequencies, which is just the frequency of the body. And this allows it to move through the wall. And the second part of this today, I want to talk about the messages that are passed through physical contact. People who are taken to craft, where the entities are visible to them and are in communication with them. The first case I wrote about in Beyond UFOs, and the case study was of ELAINE Burke, who was a housewife in Texas in 1957. Her husband worked at night in a factory, and she would go to bed very, very late at night so that she would be able to serve him breakfast in the morning, and he would, they would both go to bed together and sleep through the day, so she could be very quiet. And so she stayed awake late at night just reading, and she wouldn't even begin to sleep until very early in the morning hours, or about the time when her husband arrived, or after he went to bed. So this particular night, something unusual happened. She kept her windows open. They didn't even have a fan in the house. It's summertime, and she's very, very hot. And so she takes a cool shower and she goes to bed and she starts reading. She read in her bed. And she suddenly fell asleep. She never did this. And then she was awakened by a very bright light that was coming into her apartment. And the next thing she knew, she was out in the yard and there was a craft out there. And so she said there were two entities, like in a bubble, on the top of this craft. And one of them was holding what she thought was some kind of gun. And she was afraid they were going to shoot her. And they said, they read her thoughts, and they responded to her telepathically and said to her, don't worry, no harm will come to you. And so they took her to craft, and they took her more than one time. They took her several times throughout her lifetime, and they changed the person that she was. Like all experiencers, and especially abductees, are changed for the better. Excuse me. So the message that was, one of the messages that was given to ELAINE BURKE is that they are involved in the connection of DNA to determine whose genetic material will survive the environmental collapse of the Earth's ecosystem. So do you notice how these little pieces of information that were not disseminated to the public are being repeated by different groups, by the tall humans who Frances SWAN saw sometimes, who would materialize in her house, to Kevin Briggs, and now to ELAINE BURKE way back in 1957. So the same kind of messages are being given. They also said there is one universal force that connects all of us. And the next communication I want to talk about is what the non-human entities told my family and told me. Well, I'm the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, and here's a photograph of me when I was younger and my Aunt Betty out by the family pool. I grew up across the street from my grandparents. This is Betty's father, Raymond Barrett, and my grandmother, Florence Barrett. My mother was Betty's sister. And here's Betty and Barney. And this guy out here was my father. It was a hot day, so he was probably in his swimsuit washing his truck or something like that. My grandparents' house is over here. And there was a UFO that landed on my grandparents' farm on April 23rd, 1966. And so I used this picture. It was the only picture I had of that part of the yard. And so a craft came in, and it was observed by two people, by my grandmother and one of our neighbors coming in. And it was investigated by UFO investigators. And what Betty wrote in her diary is that all the trees in a circular pattern were broken or bent or badly scraped at a height of 12 inches from the, or 12 feet from the ground. In the center was a slight triangular indentation measuring 36 inches on each side. The dried grass was burned as well as some bark in the trees. Now, this is an aerial view of my grandparents' home. This is approximately the area where the craft landed. Trees have overtaken this area. My grandparents had all of this area as grass and gardens when they lived there. They've been long deceased, but the new family let the trees grow up. So it was about 250 feet from where that craft landed to my childhood home, which was over here. My experiences and my mother's were investigated by Dr. James Harder, who is here on the right. He was an engineer. He taught engineering at the University of Colorado, Berkeley. He was a civil engineer, and he worked on biorobotics as well. And my mother and I believe, were taken on that date in April of 1966. But we kind of kept this secret. And I was traumatized by it. I was scared to death. I had conscious memories of being on that craft and having these entities standing around me. I didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't remember their faces. And so I finally did have hypnosis in the 1970s because they came back and I had contact with them, and I was still traumatized a few years later. It wasn't until I worked through all of this with a really knowledgeable and compassionate hypnotherapist that I realized that I should not be fearful. And I worked on this for years because I always had that fight or flight response. I developed a technique of self-hypnosis so that I would not be frightened and I could communicate with them. There were 2 times in my lifetime where a UFO was seen hovering low outside my house, besides the one in New Hampshire. One was when I lived in Colorado, and no, both of them were when I lived in Colorado. I lived in Crested Butte, Colorado for several years. My neighbors tried to find me, but I was missing. I had memories of grays in my bedroom and of being on a craft. I would receive telepathic messages from them that they were going to come and see me that night. And that would make me feel very nervous. I had memories of a nice escort, though, who communicated with me and made me feel comfortable. My escort showed me artificial wombs containing fetuses and or gestational tanks. They weren't shaped like wombs. And my case was investigated, and I had hypnosis with Dr. Harder at that time. So some of the messages that were given to me that I am performing an important function for them, that it is helping them to understand more about us, and they need to take my genetic material. They said that they take tissue samples to check for environmental toxicity. They're concerned about the disintegration of our species. And as I thought about that, I realized that I grew up just downstream, maybe a mile or less away, as the crow flies, from a toxic waste dump. It's a Superfund site, the Kingston, New Hampshire barrel factory. And it was washing out these barrels and emptying them into a stream. And that stream fed the lake that I lived up nearby, grew up nearby. And also water probably was leaching into our wells. So that was a big concern to me when we later found out what was going on. But it makes sense to me that they wanted to check my body for environmental toxicity. I lived 20 miles away from a nuclear base, and I lived about 21 miles away from the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard that was building nuclear submarines. So it makes sense to me now. He told me, my escort told me, that I'm part of them, that we're family. I have no reason to be fearful or to distrust them. They mean no harm. And by closely monitoring family lines, they can document positive changes generationally. Our failure to be good stewards to our planet, our failure to care for our fellow humans, and our propensity for warlike behavior present a danger to the survival of our species. Their group is attempting to upgrade humans and to assist in the development of our species. Our level of spiritual maturity is out of balance with our technological development and could lead us down the path to annihilation. When this imbalance occurs and civilization does not mature spiritually, it can lead to the disintegration of our species and life on our planet. They have seen this occur elsewhere, and they are attempting to raise spiritual consciousness. Well, this was information they gave to me before I ever met Kevin Briggs. So, and I've, in doing this study, realized that this information that was given to me and documented was similar to the messages that people have received dating back to 1954. And I've worked on 3 major studies on experiencers, about 5,000 in all, I guess. Denise Stoner and I did the first in 2012. Then I worked on the Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation's experiencer study with PhD academics and lay researchers such as myself. And also we did a MUFON study. I was MUFON's Director of Experiencer Research. No longer am. I've stepped down recently due to time constraints, but we had 516 experiencers. And I worked on that with Michael Austin Melton, Dr. Michael Austin Melton, Dr. Don C. Donderi from McGill University, psychologist, Denise Stoner, and Craig Lang, who was had his master's degree, and he was a hypnotherapist. But what we discovered from our study, MUFON study, that also was pretty much the same as what we've discovered in Free study, is that most experiencers have received telepathic messages and downloads of information. Most are intuitive or psychic. All who participated in the study are empaths, all of the abductee group. Many have been healed and some work to heal others. All have increased spirituality. Most have feelings of universal connectedness. More than half have higher than average environmental awareness. Many have been informed about environmental changes and the possibility of global war, and many feel that they are here to assist the ETs in their mission to save our planet and increase human spiritual consciousness. And I wrote about the studies in my book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted. I don't like that term abduction because I no longer feel that I've been abducted. I feel like I've been part of this and volunteered to do this job a long, long time ago. But my publisher gets to name the book, and they said, well, people won't know what you mean if you just call this an experiencer's handbook. We need to use the word abducted. So I said, well, okay, I don't feel happy about it, but I'll do it. So I want to thank you for listening. And these are the 5 books that are for sale, still for sale now. Science Was Wrong, that I did with Stanton Friedman, Startling Truths About Cures, Theories and Inventions They, meaning scientists, over the past couple of 100 years, declared impossible, but they were wrong. The next book that Stanton and I wrote together was Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. We did a great deal of research in physical archives. We read the correspondence files of those people who were debunkers, skeptics, and disinformants, we found out, and how they worked together. And it's all in that book. I wrote the Alien Abduction Files, the most startling cases of human alien contact ever reported, with Denise Stoner. And her story is in this book and other cases that I have investigated. I did the hypnosis on several of those as well. So we're very proud of that book. And Denise Stoner is actually the very knowledgeable and kind hypnotherapist who worked with me to help me to resolve this stress and fear that I was carrying. Also, Extraterrestrial Contact, I already talked about that, and the new Captured, the 60th anniversary edition. So thank you very, very much. I hope that you enjoyed my lecture, that you learned from it, and I was so thrilled to be with you today.
Kathleen, that was absolutely astounding. Okay, I loved it. I loved in particular that you shared your own story too, your own contacts. It wasn't just all the research, which is in itself fascinating enough, but I'm just so grateful that you're part of that family lineage that's been contacted with the as an experiencer. So thank you. And for sharing this, I can see why they chose you to do this work.
Thank you. That's what they tell me. They tell me that I am a communicator, a carrier of information between them and humanity.
No, you are absolutely. And I could feel the power of what you were saying. You answered so many of my own questions. I've been an experiencer, I guess, my entire life, and this just really fits. So I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone here, because I know everyone here has had their own experiences. That's what brings us together. So thank you so much. And if you don't mind, maybe you want to stop in the chat for a few minutes, see if there's any questions.
Okay.
If you have a
Be
couple
happy
of
to.
minutes.
I'll stop sharing this screen. Here we are.
And ciao.
And
Thank you.
I will.
Sweet. All right. Oh my God, take a deep breath. And to think that, you know, we did that intention before she came on, and I did not know she was going to be talking about all these messages. So I hope you were able to absorb them and feel like the person, feel those messages, because there's so much, they're so meant for each and every one of us who's here.